Hey now, it's your boy Delta City Fox. I'm back, that's right. It is Friday, May 26, 2023. Thank you for joining me as I take a morning stroll here on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, Illinois. Today, I would like to discuss what fascism is, what is the objective definition of fascism. Here in the United States, calling someone a fascist is commonly used as an incendiary pejorative, and yet no one seems to be able to define it. The definitions I have found have been highly subjective and usually based on characteristics rather than on a fundamental baseline philosophy. This crude understanding of what fascism is a real shame, because fascism is very dangerous, especially to freedom and prosperity for the individual. And how could you prevent fascism if you don't know what it is to begin with? A large part of the reason that calling someone a fascist is such a common insult here in the United States is less about a critique of fascism as an ideology, because like I mentioned, most people don't understand what it is in the first place. Instead, it's more due to American folklore. In American history books, our supreme conflict and celebrated righteous victory was World War II, and our great vanquished, quintessentially evil adversary from World War II was Nazi Germany, a self-proclaimed fascist government. So, calling someone a fascist from a civil religious standpoint is kind of like a religious person calling someone the devil. Now, I'm going to posit an objective definition for fascism. I am then going to liken that definition to Nazi Germany to demonstrate fascism manifested. So, the definition. Fascism is a governmental system where the people exist at the pleasure of the state and for its benefit. This is in contrast to Western-style governments, to wit, democratic republics, such as the United States, where the state exists, or at least is supposed to exist, at the pleasure of the people and for their benefit. In other words, the people exist to serve the state instead of the state existing to serve the people. So, fascism from the state's perspective is the moral equivalent of a person going into his closet and organizing his wardrobe. To further illustrate this analogy, let's say that the year is 1992. You've just seen the Nirvana music video Smells Like Teen Spirit on MTV. And now you're looking to personify a grunge look, just like Nirvana's lead singer, Kurt Cobain. But your closet is populated by bell-bottoms, suede shirts, platform boots, and other disco attire from your John Travolta Saturday Night Fever phase several years prior. Well, your wardrobe exists at your pleasure and for your benefit. So, how do you transform it to match this grunge theme? Maybe some of your disco attire you can incorporate into your new grunge look. Or perhaps you can use some of it as sleepwear or casual wear. But to the extent that your remaining disco attire is no longer appropriate or useful to wear, it's removed from your closet. Maybe you can sell some of it or donate it to charity. Otherwise, it's converted into rags, thrown away, or stuffed in a box and put in storage. Simultaneously, you acquire new clothes to complement this grunge theme and repopulate your wardrobe. So when you take this utility value objectification, property ownership approach, and transpose it onto a government's relationship to the people in its geographical territory, you get fascism. So now let's take a look at how this ideology plays out by examining the paradigm of fascism, Nazi Germany. Starting in February 1933 until August 1934, Germany transformed into a fascist state, which it remained through May 1945 and the end of World War II in Europe. As a fascist state, it was governed by a single political party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party. The head of the Nazi Party was Adolf Hitler. He ruled Germany with absolute power as an autocrat. So, let's explore the characteristics of Nazi Germany and how those characteristics were a logical consequence of fascism, according to the definition that I've posited, which once again is a governmental system where the people exist at the pleasure of the state and for its benefit. First, let's talk about objectifying people as state utilities. Much like my analogy of someone organizing his wardrobe, a fascist state is going to organize its people. When the Nazi Party came to power in Germany, it redefined what a German citizen was. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 codified Nazi population preferences by distinguishing desirables from undesirables when granting, affirming, or disaffirming German citizenship. The Nazi government had a pro-Germanic theme, and thus it wanted to foster Aryan people, that is, Caucasian or white-skinned people, especially with blue or green eyes and colored hair, as it believed that these phenotypes embodied the genome of historically German people. So, you could be not ethnically German, not speak German, and have never been to Germany, and still be given German citizenship by the Nazi government, and tendered with state social benefits to support your existence. To wit, as part of the Nazi-sanctioned Lebensborn program, Aryan-looking children from territories under German military occupation were kidnapped and taken to be raised as citizens of Nazi Germany. Simultaneously, the Nazi government was looking to cull from its population various undesirables. These were, among others, non-Aryan people, people of the Jewish faith, political dissidents, and those whom the Nazis deemed to have mental or physical handicaps. The methods that the Nazi government would employ to achieve this culling of undesirables included economic disincentives, such as stripping them of their German citizenship, taking away their various state-issued licenses, disallowing them from working for the state, and seizing or destroying their property. The Nazis also employed eugenics, such as miscegenation laws, euthanasia, forced sterilization, and extermination, be it by sending people to concentration camps to exploit them through forced labor before offing them, or by outright murder. Someone who was subject to this determination of undesirability to the Nazi government was Albert Einstein, perhaps the most brilliant human mind of the 20th century. Among other things, he had, prior to all this, devised the theory of relativity. Einstein was born in Germany, was a German citizen, spoke German as a first language. His family had been in Germany for several hundred years, and he owned real estate in Germany. Yet, shortly after the Nazi Party came to power in 1933, Einstein, who was working abroad at the time, abandoned all of his assets in Germany and renounced his German citizenship. If he had returned to Germany, he would have undoubtedly faced persecution and likely eventual extermination by the Nazi government, as he was Jewish and thus undesirable to the state. Essentially, the Nazi government was going through its closet and reorganizing its wardrobe to exclude Jewish people, among others. Likewise, let's consider one of my childhood crushes, the beautiful Dina Meyer, who is a Jewish-American actress from New York City and whose grandparents came from Germany. Here is a movie still of her as Dizzy Flores from the film Starship Troopers, which fittingly satirizes fascism. Despite her formidable Aryan appearance, if she had been in Nazi Germany, she would have been persecuted as an undesirable because she is Jewish. So, the Lebensborn program, Albert Einstein, and Dina Meyer, these are just a few examples of how Germany as a fascist state did or could objectify people as utilities, and how such a utility value determination would result in the state nurturing people or treating them with abhorrence. All this in accordance with fascism as an ideology, where the people are utilities that exist at the pleasure of the state and for its benefit. Next, let's discuss nationalism and why it's a common feature of a fascist state. First, what is nationalism? I would define it as pride and advocacy for a nation. So then what is a nation? I would define a nation as a group of people united by a common society and a common way of life. However, governments have usually commandeered nation to be interchangeable with the state. Such was certainly the case with the Nazi government, which ordained itself as the tangible embodiment of the German nation. This doublespeak meant that if you were for or against the Nazi government, that you were likewise for or against the German nation. So, the de facto definition of German nationalism under Nazi governance was pride and advocacy for the Nazi government as an accepted personification of the German people, their society, and their way of life. Now, when there is competition amongst nations, and when people take on a nationalist identity, nationalism often becomes dogmatic, like a lawyer zealously advocating for her client. This group psychology is very evident in sports. With that, let's take a quick look at this scene from the film EuroTrip. Here the two protagonists are traveling with some soccer hooligans from the United Kingdom, who are going to attend a football match in Paris. Let's take a look.
Back off! Join your Gaelic fucking garlic breath tossers! Better get in here and say that, you froggy eyes, shite eyes! Fucking think! We'll feed you bastard all over your fucking nose! Get out of the way! Piss off! Hey lads! That wanker's got a frog football shirt on! Let's give this Nancy a fucking good kicking! Come on, lads! It's going off! Yeah!
So, this film is a comedy, and the hooligans are meant to be caricatures, but there's a lot of truth to the sports fanatics stereotype. And personally, I've always been amazed at seeing grown adults get in frenzied confrontations over sports. Now, was Nazi Germany nationalist? Undoubtedly it was. It promoted both to the German people and to the international community the idea of German racial superiority, German cultural superiority, and later, German military superiority, amongst other claims. But why was Nazi Germany nationalist to begin with? Well, as a fascist state where the people under its governance existed at its pleasure and for its benefit, the Nazi government was already unsurprisingly egocentric. And when it designated itself as the embodiment of the German nation, German nationalism then became state self-promotion. This also put the Nazi government in a power position as an arbiter. It could redefine what the German nation was to include or exclude people and behavior in accordance with its own political agenda. As arbiter, the Nazi government could also harness and channel the primitive cave person dogmatic nationalism that we discussed earlier to advance state goals. Now, why wouldn't you, as the state, indoctrinate those people under your governance with a nationalist narrative? Such a narrative would ex post facto justify to them that their objectification by you is worthy of their cooperation. Them being members of the nation, and you, the state, being the embodiment of that nation and its arbiter. You likely would. The narrative might go, the German nation is superior. We, the Nazi government, are the embodiment of the German nation. Because you are German, you are also a member of our nation. Accordingly, we grant you German citizenship. We are going to conscript you into the German army and send you to fight and possibly die in this military conflict, but it's okay, because we deem your sacrifice to be for the prosperity of Germany. Thank you for your ex post facto cooperation. Otherwise, you may have a fascist state that is not nationalist, or one that is nationalist, but that excludes its nationalist narrative from segments of the governed. Segments such as second-class peoples, prisoners of war, and undesirables. Such a state is going to have to expend more energy pacifying resistance from such people. Imagine this alternative, non-nationalist government narrative. We, the Nazis, are the ruling gang of warlords. We are conscripting you into our army as a slave soldier. If you resist, you will be killed. This latter exclusionary approach, instead of the former inclusive nationalist one, is a lot less likely to elicit cooperation from the objectified. So, although it's not a necessary one, nationalism is a very common feature of fascism. Next, let's talk about militarism as a familiar facet of fascism. So first, the definition of militarism with regards to state administration. I would define militarism as the endorsement of a strong military and its aggressive use. Now, this may be actual military use or the threat of use. So, even before the outbreak of World War II, Nazi Germany was very militaristic. Much of the Nazi government's pre-war budget was going towards building its war machine. This included peacetime military conscription. Now, in fascism, the people exist for the benefit of the state, and having a strong war machine in peacetime will protect the state from both foreign aggression and from domestic dissent. Moreover, concerning military conscription, starting in 1935, German men under the age of 25 were required by law to serve at least 2 years in Nazi Germany's military. So as a fascist state, if the people are your utilities, and you have able-bodied young men who would be good soldiers, why wouldn't you put these state utilities in a position where they could best serve the state, i.e. the military? Of course you would. Additionally, by serving in the military, it also can indoctrinate these people to support the state, because they're acting as agents of it. But Nazi Germany's militarism also brought about a paradox. So, September 1st, 1939, the outbreak of World War II, Nazi Germany invades neighboring Poland. 2 days later, France and Great Britain declare war on Nazi Germany. This military expansionism by Nazi Germany was ostensibly to achieve Lebensraum, or living space for the German people, though it was the very people who Nazi Germany wanted to foster who would be doing the fighting and who would be suffering the casualties of war. Now, in 1939, before World War II, the population of Nazi Germany was roughly about 85 million people. A conservative and approximate ex post facto estimate of World War II German deaths is 3 million German military deaths and about 1 million German civilian deaths, though I've seen death figures significantly higher than that. This rough estimation does not include, among other things, war casualties who were injured, maimed, or who suffered psychological damage. So, if Nazi Germany is trying to foster and promote good Aryan stock, then why in pursuit of living space is it sacrificing several million members of its population? A population that presumably embodies these desirable Aryan genomes. Well, again, Nazi Germany is fascist. The people living under its governance exist at its pleasure and for its benefit. They are utilities. From a fascist state's point of view, jeopardizing your populace to engage in military expansionism would be the moral equivalent of someone jeopardizing his financial stability to invest in a business endeavor, risking some of his assets in the short term for the possibility of an even greater return in the future. In June 1941, Adolf Hitler ordered the commencement of Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, which included an invasion force of over 3 million German troops. He likely thought something like, well, whatever casualties the state suffers in order to secure victory, the benefits from the living space that we will acquire from victory will result in 2x future good Aryan stock or 5x future good Aryan stock for the state in place of those war casualties. And by that utility value reasoning, we can see how a fascist state might consider that projected outcome to be an advantageous trade-off. Moreover, in the case of Nazi Germany and Operation Barbarossa, that fascist perspective persuaded Adolf Hitler to do something especially reckless: invade the Soviet Union, an endeavor that was initiated with the goal of growing state power for the Nazi government. So, militarism is a predictable feature of a fascist state because it protects the state in peacetime and it enables state expansion in wartime. Now, let's talk about dictatorship as a cornerstone element of fascism. First, what is a dictatorship? It's when an individual or a limited group of individuals working together has a monopoly on unrestricted or nearly unrestricted governmental powers. Nazi Germany was a dictatorship. Adolf Hitler alone ruled Germany with unfettered governmental powers between August 1934 and the end of April 1945. The Weimar Republic, which governed Germany between 1918 and 1933, had codified in its constitution governmental restrictions and protection of individual rights for the German people. But, per Article 48, the constitution also had the means to suspend such features in a time of crisis. In February 1933, the Reichstag, a Weimar Republic governmental building in Berlin, was subversively burnt down. Hitler, who was the recently appointed Chancellor of Germany, blamed the event on political opposition, and he used Article 48 of the Constitution to temporarily acquire near-dictatorial powers to combat the upheaval surrounding the Reichstag fire. This was codified in something called the Reichstag Fire Decree, and then, soon thereafter, in something called the Enabling Act. Hitler's new powers were only restrained by German President Paul von Hindenburg. But, following the president's death in August 1934, Chancellor Hitler seized presidential powers and declared himself the Führer, or leader of Germany. He extended his own temporary powers indefinitely, effectively becoming dictator of Germany. Hitler had circumvented or otherwise ignored governmental restrictions of him, allowing him as dictator freedom and impunity to fully objectify the German people as utilities of the state, in accordance with fascism as an ideology, and similarly to how you have unrestricted governance over the clothes in your wardrobe. Now, could fascism exist outside of a dictatorship? Yes. In fact, some degree of the state objectifying people as existing at its pleasure and for its benefit seems to be an inevitability in all governments. But without a dictatorship, there will be checks and balances that will limit such state objectification to fascism at a piecemeal level. Hence, why a dictatorship and a fascist government are logical bedfellows. Lastly, let's now look at authoritarianism and totalitarianism as common sister features of fascism. So, concerning government administration, what is authoritarianism? I would define it as the state using force to mandate and control how people under its governance should exist. Now, in a fascist system, the people exist at the pleasure of the state and for its benefit. They are state utilities after all. So why wouldn't the state take it upon itself to manage how these people, as utilities, live their lives? It would. This is authoritarianism. So then what is totalitarianism? It is authoritarianism that is omnipresent. In other words, it's the state micromanaging people to ensure their obedience. So authoritarianism and totalitarianism, how did such outcomes play out in Nazi Germany? By the government both controlling how people acted and how they thought, and through state surveillance. One particular example of how the Nazis controlled how people acted, which was touched on earlier, was through legislating procreation. Laws based on Rassenschande or blood contamination outlawed, among other things, sexual relations between German citizens and those people the Nazi government deemed as undesirable to the state. Such laws were very authoritarian. Additionally, some of those undesirables were forcibly sterilized by the Nazis to make certain that they didn't procreate. Those actions were totalitarian. Now, concerning the Nazi government also controlling what its citizens thought, it employed state indoctrination, one example of which was through making membership in the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls mandatory for Germany's young people. This was important because if people are well indoctrinated to be good, agreeable, compliant utilities, then the state won't have to work as hard subjecting them to re-education or micromanagement. The Nazi government, additionally through its Ministry of Propaganda, produced a litany of state adverts, films, posters, and other propaganda, including the 1935 film Triumph of the Will, which interestingly was satirized in the opening scene of the film Starship Troopers. The Nazi government also greatly restricted speech, both by censoring individual speech and through controlling the press by filtering it through the Ministry of Propaganda. So there's a mishmash here of the Nazi government both managing and micromanaging the thoughts of its citizens. Now, concerning state surveillance, when I think of totalitarianism, especially as I've defined it, authoritarianism that is omnipresent, it reminds me of the 1948 dystopian George Orwell novel 1984, where state surveillance cameras and microphones were compulsorily placed in people's homes. There, the state was omnipresent because it was quite literally always watching and listening. Such mass surveillance technology did not exist during Nazi Germany's regime. That said, how was Nazi Germany still attempting to always monitor its people to ensure compliance? through the Gestapo, which was the secret police of Nazi Germany, though, even at its height in 1944, it only had around 32,000 members to police 80+ million Germans and tens of millions of subjugated people. So while this was state surveillance, it was not mass state surveillance. But it was commonplace for well-indoctrinated German citizens, both civilians and non-Gestapo state agents, to narc on their fellow Germans to the state. Such peer policing allowed some Nazi government authoritarianism to be omnipresent and thus totalitarian. So, authoritarianism and totalitarianism, whether the state is managing the existence of people or micromanaging it, it all stems from the fascist perspective that the people are state utilities. In summary, fascism is a governmental system where the people exist at the pleasure of the state and for its benefit. In other words, the people exist to serve the state instead of the state existing to serve the people. Now, features of Nazi Germany, the paradigm of fascism that we've discussed, are objectification of the people as state utilities, nationalism, militarism, dictatorship, and authoritarianism/totalitarianism. All are logical and predictable outcomes stemming from a state that views people under its governance as utilities. So, what other governments qualify as fascist per the objective definition that I've posited? I definitely have some interesting thoughts on a particular contemporary government that I think is especially fascist, as well as on a notorious 20th century government that is very fascist, even though most people don't think of it as such. In addition to those governments in the 1984 novel and the Starship Troopers film that I referenced earlier, there are several fictional governments that I believe are good examples of fascism. To boot, I regularly notice degrees of fascism in present-day governments, including at a piecemeal level in Western-style democratic republics. But those discussion points are content for a future video. And with that cliffhanger, I'll end it. I really appreciate you having taken the time to join me in my discussion positing an objective definition for fascism. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye now.